The most obvious difference is the wheelbase, 16.5 inches longer than stock. And that 4, 5, 6. So it's backwards, reverse pattern, exactly how I wanted it. What's up, guys? It's Gary with Diesel Fuel Network. And yeah, I know most of the things I have on this channel are not diesel related, but that's all right. So I was not expecting to get as many views as I did on this this thing a couple videos ago. I mean, I've been putting out videos with this thing for I don't know, not quite a year, but I haven't really gotten a lot of attention with it. And all of a sudden, I got 100,000 views on that video going up the road and driving through the woods. Did a top speed run on it. It actually wasn't even that fast. 47 miles an hour is what I got out of it, and it's actually gone faster in a different configuration with different pulleys and a lighter. Basically, it was lighter because it was less stuff on it, less chassis. I've gone 55 with it, but I don't have proof of that, so really that's just me talking. So I wanted to just do an overview, what it is, what it started out as, kind of the history of the machine as far as it goes to me, and yeah, some of the details that I've been getting a lot of questions about, particularly like the hub setup with the trailer wheels, and I also wanted to just do a recap on the rev limiter setup that it has. But to start out with, I got this thing about 10 years ago, and well, actually, what is it? It's actually a Craftsman LT2000, and it'd be like a 1999 or 2000 Craftsman LT2000, and it is basically this machine. So this is obviously a Husqvarna, but it is the same machine underneath. The same company, I can't remember the name of the company. I think it was MTD, because there's a few different companies that did mowers. They made both of them. Husqvarna's and Craftsman's for a time period were actually built under the same manufacturer. So the chassis, everything, the steering components, the axle, all of that is the same, except for I think the Husqvarna's were all hydrostatic. I could be wrong. And then the Craftsman's you could get with a manual transaxle. So, you know, you can see the drastic difference of these two machines, particularly the wheelbase and just the general size, and we'll get to how I did that. And like I said, I got it about 10 years ago, and I'll put in a picture of, right after I got it, I stripped all the bodywork off of it and just driving it around like that. I'll put in a 140p video for you right here. And then a few years went by, and I actually did some of the work that's done to it now, like the hood, the old Agway bodywork. So basically, I used to work for a mower shop, a local, just small engine shop. And over the time of working there, I had collected certain things, like the old bodywork and stuff. The hubs even are things that I collected. And we're going to talk about what the hubs are, and unfortunately, they're not actually that easy to find, but there's better solutions than these anyway, so we'll not worry about that. One of my videos where I was driving the truck trying to show how to drive the 2-speed axle, actually a couple different people said, man, you're long-winded, you talk way too much, get to the point. And yeah, I do. I like to talk, I like details, so forgive me if I'm just rambling on, but that's what I do. So like I said, this machine here 100% pretty much is what this actually started out as. The most obvious difference is the wheelbase. The wheelbase on mine is 16.5 inches longer than stock. So one of the first things I did to modify this thing years ago was extending the wheelbase, and I didn't do that by welding or extending anything. I did not extend the frame at first. I gained 10 inches of wheelbase just by mounting the stock axle, front axle, to the front of the frame. So on this machine here, you can see that the axle mounts under there, and actually you can kind of see the notch down there. That's where it would have stock mounted. There's of course a pivot there, so if you're wanting to do this and still be off-road capable, you'd want to try to retain that pivot. Also, just a quick side note, cast iron axle. This one has it, that has it. This machine, my Craftsman as it originally was, did not have a cast iron axle. It had a stamped steel axle, which is much weaker. And yeah, so that actually gained 10 inches of wheelbase right there, just mounting that. It has Heim joints on the steering, and again, it is just solid bolted right to the frame. And that will, if you're wanting to go quickly and make it handle a little better, that having it solid mounted like that will make a big improvement in stability. And of course, that's only 10 inches. So the other 6.5 inches of wheelbase extension, I only just recently did the past few months, or 6 months or so. And that is at the rear. Of course, I extended the frame. Now, without taking everything apart, it's going to be difficult to see, but I have videos that you can go back and watch to see the extension of the frame. So you could see those yellow pieces. And again, I actually did a lot of this work, most of it with just junk that I had laying around. So that's why they're just random yellow bits. And those were like probably 1.5, maybe 2 by 2. I'm not sure. I think maybe they were 2 by 2 square steel. Laid them, they go up in, they extend up into the frame a bit, and they're all welded up in there, and welded to the frame here. And then the stock axle perches welded to the back there. Then some more stuff I added later, like that actually only came back to like right there. Then I just recently added this extra bit here and reinforced that in order to put the fuel tank and the battery there, because before I just had some like crappy fuel tank kind of zip tied to the back of it because it was a leaky fuel tank, so I didn't want to permanently mount it. And this is actually the original fuel tank to the machine. 3 gallon, I believe, 3 or 3.5, I think 3 gallon. So that would have sat underneath the seat. It's a bit different on this Husqvarna, but the idea is the same. It has the under seat gas tank, although it's a much different gas tank altogether. And then you could see on the back, it would have just been a big squared off frame. This is also the same chassis. This is another one I'm going to be working on, or I started working on, and I actually cut a lot of this off. So the back of the chassis comes way up, and as you could see, there's really nothing to these chassis. They're really thin. Up there, they're a little bit better. But no matter what, you really do have to reinforce them with cross members and stuff like that. I do have bits of a Murray chassis here. It was a full Murray chassis I'm going to take apart to do this one. But that's a whole nother story. So back to the rear section of the frame here. I'll put a photo in right here again, and you could see that in this photo, the seat was kind of much higher up. I didn't completely chop the frame down, and the rear of the frame was stock length. Here, with this new setup, the extended frame, I'm sitting beyond where the original frame was, right flat on the frame. This seat, by the way, you could buy this brand new. It's like $80. Probably the most expensive thing. Well, the wheels and tires are the most expensive thing I actually bought for it. That would be second, I think. That is a Manco go-kart seat. M-A-N-C-O. Maybe you've heard of Manco go-karts, old school go-karts. Well, you could still buy those brand new. There's a company, I can't remember where they're out of. I'll put the name of where I got that. No sponsorship or anything, but I'll just throw that in there. So that is a Manco go-kart seat. The steering wheel was a score that I got on eBay for 10 bucks, and it was exactly what I wanted. A nice big diameter, thin-rimmed, old-school looking wheel. And it's not just the look, it's the feel. It's how it feels when you drive it. It's perfect. And I found out later from somebody who watches the videos, can't remember who it was exactly, but that it is a old Mercury boat steering wheel. And I love that steering wheel. It's one of my favorite things I did to it. The dash and the tack and everything like that, I did that years ago. Kind of the second stage of modifications. And that's just an old Autometer, auto gauge, like cheapo tack. And as far as the switch gear goes, choke, start. And then we have the actual ignition, on off for starting. Headlights, and then that is for the 2-step rev limiter, which I have it on a toggle switch and not a button, because originally I had the rev limiter set up on here, as a top end, like 4,500, 5,000 RPM rev limiter just for ripping it around. And so I wanted to still have that option to where I could just turn it on and leave it on instead of having like a momentary switch for it. And it works fine as a two-step. You know, it's easy to flick the switch once you launch it. So I like it like that. Oh, and let's just talk about the Transaxle real quick. So it is a Peerless MST206 6-speed, one of the best Transaxles that you can have on a machine like this. They're also very common. They came in a lot of different machines, especially Craftsman mowers from, like I said, like late 90s into the 2000s. A lot of machines, all the way up into probably fairly new machines, had the Peerless MST206. Just a couple of key things that make it good is that it takes gear oil from the factory, so it has seals and it holds gear oil. And also the fact that it has a gear drive reverse as opposed to a chain drive reverse, which almost every other Transaxle has a chain drive reverse, which are prone to failure when you're going, you know, high speed, stuff like that. So that's the Transaxle, and I still only have the original Transaxle brake, which is on this other lever, and you know, you can adjust that and you get like 2 stops out of it and then it's worn out. So it doesn't really work very well at all, but it's there. It does help if you need it. It's something, it's better than nothing. But the thing is with these mowers is there's not only the engine braking, but there's so much drag on the Transaxle when it's in gear that it's really it really slows it down. So unless you're like in the woods about to hit a tree, you don't really need the brakes. I almost never use the brakes, like particularly like going up the road and stuff like that. I just like really never use the brakes. The video where I was ripping it around in my yard like a track, I was never touching the brakes. You just you lay into it and then you let off it and it slows down. I was in 3rd gear, just leaving it in 3rd. I do have a plan though for a really cool brake setup on this, which I won't discuss right now because it's kind of it'll just be me rambling. So let's talk about the wheels and the hubs and everything like that. So these are 12-inch trailer wheels, 5 by 4.5, and there is just mower parts being used to connect them to the tractor. So if you've ever seen like a heavier duty garden tractor, I'm sure many of you if you're watching this, you know, some heavy duty garden tractors have 5-lug wheels. In fact, here are some garden tractor wheels right here. You know, I'm sure you've seen the heavier duty lawn tractors that have these 5 lugs. So those are 5 on 4.5. All those garden tractor setups are 5 on 4.5, which is what trailer wheels are, and frankly a lot of vehicles too, like a Jeep Grand Cherokee has 5. You know, older Jeeps have 5 on 4.5. So theoretically I could bolt Jeep wheels on here. The hubs, just that thin black part, the other part is wheel spacers. The hub is just on the rear, it is actually a Husqvarna part, or it's what would be on a Husqvarna hydrostatic, so it's a 3/4 keyed axle hub, 5 on 4.5. And on the front is basically the exact same thing, only it is a much harder to find part for like an old John Deere garden tractor because it has a 1-inch keyed bore. And so I have that, the stock J spindles, they're 3/4, but with a 1-inch bore you can run bronze bushings in there. So rather than there being no bushings at all or no bearings at all, it's at least got bronze bushings. Now it's not really relevant that those are hard to find because I wouldn't really recommend that setup anyway. What I'm going to upgrade to and what I would recommend is getting a trailer hub set with the stub axle and either custom making your own J spindles or modifying the stock J spindles with the trailer stub axle, and then you'll have like real bearings that can go as fast as you could possibly want to go on one of these. And I'm thinking doing that will actually increase my top speed quite a bit, just doing that, because it was, you know, I think there's a lot of drag with the way it's set up now. The steering setup I did years ago as well, most of it, like this whole column setup, and then just recently in one of the more recent videos I added or modified the whole top section and added the proper bearing and a much better U-joint. I had like a Crown Vic steering shaft on there before that actually was pretty decent, but the whole top section was kind of wonky. So that's how that's set up, and really that's another thing that I would say is one of the biggest changes from it being just your basic race mower deal. Or not race mower. Race mowers are typically like that, you know, like go-kart spec. But that's to me what makes the machine so much fun to drive. It separates it from just being a mower. You know, you're sitting way low, spread out, you know, like legs out, steering wheel in front of you, like a proper machine, like not road vehicle, but you know, like it's just fun to drive. Steering box is another key feature that I wanted to talk about. So this is an OEM steering box for one of these, but it's not the one that this particular machine came with. Now, I can't seem to find the original one, but the early Craftsmans, before like around 99 or 2000, I'm not sure exactly what year they switched, but the original box was a much different design, and it had a drag link or a pitman arm that actually went down through here. But you can bolt this style box right onto it. The provisions, the holes there, the pitman arm goes down through there and it comes over. And overall, you know, these are still, they'll have when they're worn out, they'll have a little bit of on-center play, but it's never going to skip. And that's the big thing. The original box that comes in these is dangerous in the sense that if you go fast, they have like bushings in them and stuff, and they can wear out and actually skip gears. And they're very, very sloppy even when they're new. These are actually called second generation. I know these as second generation Craftsman steering box. I learned that from somebody on TikTok, actually, who's much younger than me and told me that. But as far as I can know, that's second generation Craftsman steering box, and this is what you want. Like I said, this will bolt right onto these chassis, and it's an easy setup either way. You can bolt this onto any machine. Any one, you know, your custom build lawnmower, whatever you're building. And that one has the same box as well. And this is the same, this is the one from the other one that I'm working on. But you can actually see how that works. And it just, your drag link connects right to there, goes up to your steering. So you can see the drag link comes from that steering box right up to steering. And then of course the tie rod connects the two spindles, connects the two steering knuckles there. One of my proudest moments on this build, after I extended the frame, I had to figure out what I was going to do for shifter linkage, because where the shifter linkage used to actually go was no longer there from cutting the frame down. And so this deal here is actually from more junk that I had laying in the backyard. It was a steering shaft off of a go-kart, and everything here is from it. So this aluminum bearing block, which is just a piece of aluminum that it rides in, that's actually from that was actually on the steering column. This piece here is the shifter mechanism, the actual part from the mower. That's where the tie rods would have went on the steering for the go-kart. And then it has the tie rod. The tie rod is actually straight off the go-kart, and that is going to the transmission. So basically the entire steering setup here, without really doing much at all, like just bolting it right to the frame and just welding that to there, and then using the steering tie rod as is the shifter system. Now, not only that, but I put the steering shaft, or the linkage, backwards on the trans, so that unlike a regular stock mower, where typically with these manual mowers, it's always, you know, all the way back is reverse, and then it would be neutral, and then you'd go forward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is actually reverse is all the way forward, neutral 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's backwards, reverse pattern, exactly how I wanted it. It just makes more sense. But pulling back to shift up and pushing forward to shift down is how it should be. Building things from junk that literally came on the machine is another thing here. So this throttle pedal, one of the first things I ever did to this, in fact, probably the first thing I ever did to this thing, was this throttle pedal. And that is a deck link, mower deck link, that would have hung down to support the mower deck. The adjustment rod would have went through here, and it would have been oriented differently for the mower. There's a little ball bearing, and that's so your foot rides on that. And I wanted a nice long pedal with a really kind of linear travel, so it's got a nice long, you know, a long throw to it. There is a return spring on the carburetor, because when you remove the governor on these, you need to have a return spring on the carburetor. And then, of course, there's also a return spring for the throttle pedal itself. I don't know if I already said it, but the engine is a 40 cubic inch Briggs Intech V-twin. That's 656 cc. It was the older model, so it started out as an 18.5 horsepower, which had the aluminum intake manifold. And they were available as high as, I believe, 24 horsepower stock with that same displacement. So I swapped on the later, with basically nothing changed other than, as far as I know, the intake manifold. So I swapped on the later intake manifold, which is a plastic intake manifold. And you could just look at it and see that it's a better flowing design, and the internet will tell you it's a better flowing design. I can attest to, at least with proper jetting to go along with it, it made a big difference. I put that manifold on there, I drilled the jets in the carb, and it is a big difference. It just sounds, that sound that it has, it didn't have that when it was stock jetting and stock intake manifold. And also, you really need to jet it if you do an exhaust like that. And I'll show the header. It's not pretty. I made that too a long time ago. I think I'll show it. It's going to be a pain. I got to take the whole like front end off in order to show the header. Maybe I'll just show it like this. So, can we see in there at all? No. You can see how rusty it is, but it's hard to see. It's an equal length. You know, basically I just had what I had laying around and I made it. One pipe kind of snakes. Yeah, you can see here. See, that pipe goes over that way and actually comes back around into a custom collector that I made out of a pipe. Like, it's not like this is scienced out. You know, it's more for the sound than anything. And the fact that I made it equal length was probably just because I could. Like, it probably for the sound. I'm sure it definitely makes more power than the stock setup, which is just two pipes going into like a canned muffler with some baffles. But it's not scienced out or anything. It's more for the sound than anything. It leads into a 1 3/4 inch exhaust. That tailpipe is a Harley drag pipe that I, again, just had laying around. A friend of mine years ago gave me some parts. And so that was like literally just in the junk pile. Well, not junk pile, but pile of cool stuff that I might use someday. And yeah, that, not only the header, but just how long the exhaust is really what I believe gives it that really good signature sound that it has. So speaking of the exhaust, that brings me to my general vision for the machine, what I was inspired by. Why is the exhaust up here and not just down there? It's really all about the aesthetic of like a pre-war Grand Prix car, obviously in much smaller scale. Now typically the old Grand Prix cars, like teens and 20s era, is what I'm talking about. And even into the 30s they had this kind of setup. The exhaust would run right down the body. Now of course they would have full body work and you were inside of it. And this was kind of just based on the pipe that I had, and it fit perfectly right there. And of course it wouldn't be practical to have the exhaust run all the way down because my leg was right there. But that was the inspiration for that, is having the pipe up high back here was like the old race cars from you know, the teens and 20s. And of course it is just a lawnmower front end, but having the tall thin wheels, the tall thin tires, and having the axle line out ahead of the bodywork, ahead of what would be the grill, all of that was thought of was really about that look, and I drew pictures of it and everything, and that's exactly how I wanted it to look. Even a proper hot rod will have the axle moved forward, and it will have that kind of aesthetic to it. And I'm not done with this yet, so really everything just keeps coming together to give me that vibe of the pre-war Grand Prix car in small scale, down to the old school steering wheel and the single kind of race car-ish, you know, seat. And I have a tail section that I have started making and is going to go on here. And I may even go as far as doing some sort of full body work or sides on the front of it. I'm not sure. But that is really why. That's what I thought of when I built it. Is I wanted it to be kind of a small scale early race car. You know, like an early sprint car, or a small-scale pre-war Grand Prix car. So I was going to take the front wheels off and actually show you how the bushing setup is. but I really don't think that's necessary. You can actually see, if you look in there, see the edge there is actually the bronze color. So there's just bushings inserted in there. So what those are, those hubs, just to kind of reiterate what that is, they are 1-inch keyed bore. They're meant to go on a 1-inch keyed axle, like a Peerless 820 or a heavy-duty hydro transaxle that would have a keyed 1-inch axle. But then I have bronze bushings, which step it down to the 3/4, which the J spindles are on these. Pretty much, as far as I know, all of these, you know, no matter what it is, all lawn tractors, the front spindles are 3/4. Now, another thing you could do, I don't recommend this, so why am I even going to say it? I'll put it this way. Don't do this. So, I don't recommend you do this, but I will say I had a lot of success with this. This is a rear 8-inch rear wheel, so it has in it for a light duty, so it's a you know, 3/4 inch keyed axle. This actually the original wheel from my mower, the original rear wheel. And it's just metal on metal with grease. That's actually how I used to have it. So as you can see, as you saw in the other picture, these were on the front of it for a while. I went 55 miles an hour, at least according to a phone app that I didn't record a video of or anything years ago, with these on the front, grease, metal on metal with grease. That's it. This is, again, like I said, another build I'm working on. I'm trying to keep the pivot on the front axle of this one. And it probably is going to end up getting these wheels, or at least these tires. I'm not sure what wheels. I might change to a 5-lug setup. I'm not sure. And these are, again, these are like different style 12-inch garden tractor wheels. And so they just have the 1-inch keyed hub, or keyed center, you know. So they go right on, they slip right on the axle. And you could do the same thing. You could put the bushings in those and run those on your fronts. And these are basically what were on the back of that out on the back of my machine. And those are the same exact wheels again that I just showed you that are on the front of that other one. 20 by 10s are typical. Sometimes you'll see 18 by 10s or 18 by 950s or something like that. But that's like the typical tire size. You'll have 8-inch on the rear, so 20 by 10 by 8s, and then the fronts will always be 6, 15 by 6 by 6. And if you get a set of, basically if you can get a set of just rear wheels, you know, and you're just doing slow speed stuff, you can put big tires on the front. And the size of the trailer tires I have on here are 480 by 12s in the front and 530 12s in the rear. And that's about a 21-inch, maybe 20-inch, I think. Yeah, it's obviously taller than that, even though that says it's a 20. It's really, if you look it up online, it's supposed to be about a 20 or 21, but it is quite a bit taller than a regular lawnmower tire. And that alone, the tallness of your tire, will give you more speed. The taller you can go, the faster you can go with less RPM or less transmission strain. So I've actually gotten a lot of questions about the clutch in the past on this thing. And again, like I said, this is just a Craftsman LT2000 lawnmower, and the clutch, everything is stock as far as the clutch goes. I did change, I extended this pedal a bit, but let me show you what that looks like. Because if you're not dealing with a Craftsman LT, you could replicate this on whatever you're building. So from the trans up, there's no idle or pulleys, although it could use one, just to keep the belt in line. And as you can see, the belt is twisted. Once these belts twist, they don't ever go back to normal. I don't know why it keeps twisting on me. I have to deal with that, but it's actually still working okay though. So there is a critical thing to know, and that is the direction that the engine spins dictates where the clutch is. So of course the engine is spinning from the top, it'd be spinning clockwise, and you want the clutch to be on basically the forward, you know, because you figure that the engine's spinning this way, that, you know, that's going that way, and you want that clutch to be on that side. And this is actually the clutch mechanism right here, pulling the belt that way, and then this is just a stationary idler pulley. And I did this years ago, so you can laugh at my welding all you want. None of my welding is good, whether I did it yesterday or years ago. But I added this. So typically the spring is like over here. I added this whole piece here. And normally the spring actually goes like, I think, straight forward somewhere around here. And now the spring is going over to here. And that, changing that pivot point and getting the spring over there added a whole bunch more tension to the clutch. This has a 7-inch. I didn't even think about that. So like I said, I went 47 miles an hour. I wasn't quite revving the engine all the way out. It wasn't getting there. So in order to achieve that, it has a 7-inch pulley on the engine, and it has a 3-inch on the transaxle. Now, one of the things is, with the stock clutch setup on this particular chassis, the 7-inch is as big as you can go, because the clutch, when it's disengaged, is all the way to there. And if you look at that video again, you'll hear a couple times where it really sounds like a scraping, like metal on metal. That's because I'm pushing the clutch as hard as I can, and it ends up hitting this. Not really that big a deal, but you definitely have that limitation, because you need to have that travel in order to get the clutch to disengage. And so if you were to go any bigger than a 7-inch, you'd have to take the entire clutch setup and actually move it back. And then you'd be okay. You'd be able to do a bigger pulley on it. But with a stock Craftsman LT2000 chassis, that is a limitation you have. I believe 7 inches is about as big as you can go. And it's a little bit, it's almost not even, you might find that, oh, it doesn't fit because of that, but it's just, it's got set screws, there's no bolt or anything, it's just lower than it would normally be. And I got a couple washers on these, and you got to make sure these are all lined up perfectly too. And that is probably part of the reason why it's flipping, even though I believe they are lined up, because I recently did mess with that. But anyway, that's the clutch setup. You know, there's the pedal comes through from that side, and the linkage is right here, and it goes up to there, which pivots that. And I'll put the camera under here. I'll actually set the camera down so you can see it working. The thing to take note of is the cross members. I put them right through some of the existing holes in the frame, so that's just like a, I think, 1/2 by 1/2 square tube there. Goes over there, welded in place. Another one right here. And then, of course, from there back, the frame is much stronger, and it still needs more. Now, there's a kind of a balancing point depending on what you want to do with your machine. If you want it to really handle good, stiffer is better. But if you're still doing a lot of off-roading, then flexi is okay and good. So this still has quite a bit of flex to it, and I kind of want less flex, but it's not really hurting anything. It's not like a detriment to the performance of the machine. I mean, yeah, it could be better, but again, like, you don't want to leave them totally stock. They're just way too flimsy. But if you go too crazy, they get really stiff, then they become extremely harsh to drive. Now, this is rough because it has no suspension, but when you make the chassis even stiffer, they become even rougher to drive. And I have a friend that built one that made it really stiff, and it is just that much more, it is much more of a pain to literally to drive it. So one of the things I did quite a few years ago was put these quarter turn Zeus fasteners on here. That was how I set this up originally, because normally these old Agway hood and grill setups, the hood actually rides on top of here, pivots off of here. So it'll be much shorter and stubbier looking, not be looking cool. So it used to fit a lot nicer too. It had a nice, it used to have a lot nicer fitment, but over the years of bouncing it around and twisting the body and everything like that, it loosened up, and it's not quite as pretty, but it makes for, you know, it's a nice, quick and easy way to remove it. Not as easy as tipping the hood open, but it gives it the look that I want. Now, this isn't connected to anything. Normally, stock, the Agway setup had 2 of these on either side as a support, and I am going to go ahead and remake those out of different material. These are the original pieces, and they're prone to cracking and breaking on the ends. They're just really thin, kind of like thin hollow tubes, little flat ends on them. But I left this one on here because it does guide my wiring here. So I did do a dedicated video about the wiring. However, that video I originally made for TikTok, so it's up and down, not side to side. I didn't film it the correct way because I filmed it for TikTok and then I got lazy and I didn't feel like doing it all over again just for YouTube. So I'm not going to go too crazy in depth into what's going on here, but I have completely stripped the original wiring harness, and the only thing from the original wiring harness is the fuse block. So it still has the original fuse block, and that's the starting fuse and the headlight fuse. And the switches here, like I said, are, you know, headlight start on off, which on these magnetos, that just means it grounds the coil. And then this is for the rev limiter setup. And that's what that relay is for, the rev limiter. And I have a whole video properly filmed in the correct direction of the rev limiter. Now I am going to probably do a general recap on the rev limiter in a different video, because I sometimes get questions about whether or not you could do this rev limiter setup on an electronic ignition or like a 12 volt ignition. And yes, you can. Just it's wired differently than I showed in my video. And so I'm going to do a general overview on how to set it up both ways. But anyway, if you don't know and you haven't seen that video, the way I have this set up, and I did this years ago originally because I had one of these tacks laying around, and it's one of those old, you know, Fast and Furious shift light tacks. It would normally have the big yellow shift light on the side. And that is, you know, it's just a 12 volt incandescent bulb signal, 12 volt and ground going out to the shift light. And so the way the rev limiter is on this is, however, whatever RPM you have the shift light to trigger on at, when it comes on, it triggers the relay, and the relay, the other side of the relay, grounds the coil. And so at that RPM, it just grounds it out, and it's like turning the ignition off for a split second, and it just happens to work beautifully like a proper rev limiter. And you know, you can hear it in the video. And like I said, I'm going to do a more dedicated video on that again. Like, I've already done a video on it, but I'm going to just do a recap video just on how to wire that up. Kind of a more of a quick video. In that video, it was kind of a long one where I was wiring things up. You might be thinking, well, do you have to have this big, huge tachometer to do that? I had a friend try it with one of those like LED standalone shift lights that you could buy off Amazon, and he had no luck. I personally haven't tried it. I haven't figured out why that is. I do have on standby a little LED shift light that I bought off Amazon, and I am going to try that and see if I can get that to work. In which case, anybody could just do this by buying one of those little shift lights for, like, I think they're like 20 or 30, 20 bucks maybe. Whereas this is an old tack that I had laying around, and that's why I used it. I ended up actually replacing it with another one that I had to find on eBay for 40 bucks. But originally that was the same model tack that I had used. But yeah, it is really just a stock mower engine. Like I said, it has the header. Now, the only other mod to this engine besides the header and jetting the carburetor, and also, like I said, I put the plastic intake manifold on there, is this being cut out. So normally this is almost entirely filled in with just a couple little areas for air to get in. of course, because when you're actually mowing a lawn, you don't want a whole bunch of debris getting up in there, even though there is, of course, the air filter. But I think that makes a difference. I mean, it must, right? It's almost entirely shut off with a couple of little paths for the air to get to. Now it is completely cut out for max airflow. You can see it has the original Nicky 2-barrel carburetor, which these do not have. It has a removable and replaceable main jet, but it does not have a replaceable pilot jet. There's 2 pilot jets for each barrel, and then there's 1 main jet. And although you can replace the main jet, I didn't try to source one out and figure out exactly what it was. I just drilled the main jet. But before I ever drilled the main jet, I first drilled the pilot jets, because when you go and you take one of these lawnmower engines, I mean, I have all my experiences really with the Intech V-Twin, so I can't speak to all of them, but in particular, the Intech V-Twin, right when you go and put a throttle pedal on it, it has a dead spot. You can give it, you take the governor out, you put a direct cable to the throttle, and you put a throttle pedal on it, and it doesn't have the throttle response you want it to have. You drill out the pilot jets, and you get your throttle response. So in the very first thing I ever did to the engine with this barely modded exhaust, only like mildly stock exhaust, was I drilled the main pilot jets, and that made a big difference. It gives you the throttle response. And there you can see the return spring, which is going down to the throttle linkage. Now again, very specific to these Intech V-Twins, I haven't done anything special with the throttle linkage. The cable just goes right to the stock throttle linkage. There's no modification done at all to that throttle linkage. I just added the throttle return spring. The governor arm is still in the engine, but it's actually still part of the linkage, but there's no governor in the engine. I removed the governor from the engine. Now originally, I bypassed the governor spring, and it was still, again, connected to the linkage, and what happened was the governor exploded inside the engine, and then it revved to the moon. Don't do that. But, you know, it didn't kill the engine, luckily. So if you're going to bypass, if you're going to go, you know, revving these up to 4,000, 4,500 RPM, 5,000 RPM, I would get rid of the governor entirely, because it is in there. It's always going to be spinning and, you know, centrifugally moving out, so it's going to want to explode. It can explode. It can come apart, I should say. And the headlight setup on this is just the original, like, you know, what would be on the Agway front end. They're actually 4411-1 35 watt sealed beams, and they work excellent. But one thing you have to keep in mind when running good headlights like that, which are running off the battery, is being able to keep the battery charged. And there are a couple different regulators that these came with, a 3-wire and a 2-wire. Typically the 2-wire, which this originally had, will just have the headlights running off of the stator, and it'll be like when you have the engine at idle, they're dim, so they're not running off the battery, they're running off of that stator. Now when you go, and you could take that same setup and run them off the battery, but it'll have trouble keeping up with charging the battery if you're running them a lot at night. So you switch to a 3-wire, and now that is including the stator. So you swap out the stator, and it has the stator and the 3-wire regulator that goes with it. And that 3-wire regulator will do a much better job keeping up with headlights. Typically, a machine that has an electric PTO will have a 3-wire. If it has a mechanical PTO, it'll have a 2-wire. So this originally had a mechanical PTO. That over there has an electric PTO, and it has a different engine. It's a Vanguard engine, but it has the same 3-wire regulator on it. Something else I forgot to mention is the axles being lengthened. So the MST206 in particular, different models have different length axles, and you can also swap hydrostatic axles from a particular, they're, you know, 3/4 axles are basically the same in a lot of different transaxles. You could swap longer ones from a hydro into the MST. So the longer you get to start, the better. But what I've done with these is I've actually welded bolts, just butt welded bolts. Cut the ends off, cut the hex off the bolt, and I butt welded the bolt right to the end of the axle, and I have 2 nuts to jam nut. You know, one is a jam nut, and you could see them there. And the thing is, though, you got to remember is that the hub itself, the actual weight of the machine, is still riding on the axle, not on that bolt. So what it does is it's just allowing you to get a little bit more width without having to worry about the E-clip holding the axle on still. You know, because typically you can get a little bit more width and still have the hub on the axle, but now you can't bolt your hub on. So welding the bolts to the axle just allows you to still bolt the hub on. But if you got to be careful, because if you do it that way and you actually have the hub too far out, you know, you're putting a lot of stress on what is a bolt just butt welded to the axle. I heated up with a torch and I welded it, and it's been lasting like that for many years without any issues. There is a video, of course, showing another Transaxle I had on here where they actually both snapped off, but I did not weld those. Another friend of mine actually welded those a long time ago as well. And I actually have done the same thing on the front. So same thing on the front, the J spindles, there's bolts welded to those in order to space them out. Although, actually, they're not there to space them out. They used to be there, I think. Oh, you know what it was? So on the front, it was the same thing. I had welded bolts on, and that was just so I could put those rear wheels I showed you on the front. But now with the hub set up on there, there is no, they're just there obviously for the same reason, just to be able to bolt those on. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to actually secure them on there. And it has wheel spacers too. I'd like to just get 3-inch wheel spacers. I just happen to have 2-inch and 1-inch laying around, so I stacked them. So you can go ahead and hit me in the comments, tell me that's dangerous, but frankly this machine does not represent safety in any way, so I don't think those are really an issue. So this is a Spicer gearbox that I'm going to be working on, actually probably swapping on there. And as you can see, it also has some pretty long axles. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. I started working on this a while ago and I haven't finished it. Why does that not want to focus? There we go. So we just cut a bolt, chamfer the end of it. Don't let it focus. And that is just going to go on there. We're going to heat this up, heat both of these up with a torch. Get it as straight as possible, and at the end of the day, the actual weight of the hub is still going to be riding on this, not on this. Alright, so there was a whole bunch of failure in this portion of the video. I was actually really trying to get a full donut going, or a couple of donuts. To be honest, I wanted to do like a drift donut, like real wide kind of drift donut. And I was basing my belief that I could do that off of the other day when I was out here and it was a little bit muddy, a little bit slick. And also, I tried this with some giant tires on the back about a week ago, and it did it no problem as well. But it's all dry now, and there was a lot more grip here than I expected, so I really was only able to get it to kind of come out sideways a little bit. I was too nervous to really lay into it. I later figured out that I believe the belt was slipping, and I wasn't getting all the wheel speed I needed, and that was part of my issue. So here's just a couple of tries I'll throw in, and I'll actually throw in a TikTok clip of when I was doing it in the little bit slicker conditions and when I had the big tires on, which is actually a short on here of the big tires, kind of just a funny little joke. Yeah, so there I go rambling on again. Let's get to some sort of failed action. can't get a donut out of it. The other day I got a really, oh, the other day it was actually way too slick. I couldn't get anything because once I got over here it was just barely moving, but now it's got a whole bunch of grip. If I had bolsters where I could actually be able to stay on the machine and not feel like I'm going to fly off of it, then I might be able to get one, but it feels there's a little bit of a hill here. So it feels like if I stay in it, I'm just going to roll it over. It's really sketchy. Oh well. I guess we'll take it up the road and back real quick. Well, I knew I should have went to get a new belt today. The belt was slipping like crazy, especially on the way back down, but the belt came off when I went up there. I think I must have, maybe I clutched it, I don't even know, but the belt just came off. And then it was luckily going uphill right there. If I was going downhill, it'd have been a big problem, but all right. All right, well, that's going to do it for this one. I know it's kind of a long video about me just talking, but figured, you know, I like details. I get a lot of questions about every little thing on this machine. And, yeah, so hopefully that answered a lot of your questions. And, again, I'm not really done with it. I still have a lot of other things I want to do. But I'm also going to be moving on to some other projects. I got another one I'm working on, kind of started working on and then stopped working on, just sitting here. But got that. I got that Husqvarna. I may actually turn that into a project as well, because I didn't really do like this one wasn't on the channel all the way through. So the Husqvarna gives me an opportunity where I could take one from totally stock and turn it into something. Whereas that project I got there kind of wasn't really stock to begin with when I got it. But anyway, thank you guys for subscribing and, you know, liking and commenting and all that stuff. I really appreciate it. I've actually gained quite a few subscribers in the past few weeks. So thank you for joining, and I'll see you guys next time.